Ever heard a story that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust? Today we're diving into one of those stories, um, the unsettling case of Harold Henthorn, a man whose two wives both died in what seemed like freak accidents.
Hmm.
Our source material for this deep dive is an episode of the true crime podcast, Surlessly. And let me tell you, it is a real nail-biter.
I bet.
So we're going to be exploring whether these deaths were truly just tragic accidents or something far more sinister. We'll also be looking at the red flags that emerged and ultimately what we can all learn from this case.
Okay.
So to help us unpack all of this, we have our expert.
Happy to be here.
What initially stood out to you about this story?
Well, what immediately caught my attention was the sheer improbability of two wives dying in such unusual circumstances.
Right.
It's the kind of story that just makes you wonder if there's more to the picture than meets the eye.
Yeah, and it really makes you think, what are the chances?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with Harold's second wife, Toni. She was a successful ophthalmologist running her own practice down in Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she had a good life, a loving family, but she longed for that fairy tale romance, like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So she was divorced and had turned to a Christian matchmaking website hoping to find the one, and that's where she met Harold. He seemed to check all the boxes. Charming, successful, and he promised her this life of ease and luxury.
It sounds like a dream come true on the surface.
Right.
Yeah.
They fell head over heels, got married, moved to Colorado,
Yeah.
and had a daughter named Haley. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect love story.
It really does. But it's a good reminder that anyone can be vulnerable to manipulation, especially when they're seeking love and companionship.
Yeah.
We often have these idealized images of what a relationship should be, and that can blind us to potential warning signs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And boy, did some warning signs start popping up. Things took a dark turn on their 12th anniversary trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. Harold had planned this romantic getaway, surprising Toni at work with their bags already packed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they decided to go for a hike, but instead of sticking to the easier, more crowded Bear Lake Trail, they opted for the more difficult Deer Mountain Trail.
That detail, the choice of a more challenging hike is interesting.
Yeah.
Especially considering Toni had a history of knee surgeries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it seems odd that they would choose such a strenuous trail, especially starting late in the afternoon.
It does seem a bit out of character, especially considering what happened next. While they were supposedly off-trail looking for a secluded spot for a picnic, Harold claims that Toni walked too close to the edge of a cliff and fell. He called 911, but help didn't arrive for hours, and by then Toni was dead.
Delay in medical assistance is a significant factor in many cases involving potential foul play.
I see.
It's crucial to examine whether any actions or inactions might have contributed to a worse outcome.
Right. And the inconsistencies in Harold's story don't stop there. He told park rangers that he had received a text message about his daughter's soccer game, right before Toni fell. But the timestamp on the text message and his 911 call were just 1 minute apart. He claimed it took him 45 minutes to reach Toni after the fall, and then another chunk of time to find cell service. So something clearly wasn't adding up.
When a timeline doesn't match up, it's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Investigators often use timelines to reconstruct events and identify discrepancies that might indicate deception.
And here's another detail that sent chills down my spine. The Rangers found a map in Harold's car with an X marking the exact spot where Toni's body was found.
Wow. The presence of a map with a marked location is incredibly suspicious.
Right.
It raises questions about premeditation and whether the accident might have been staged.
Right. And it gets even more unsettling when you consider the physical evidence. While Toni's body showed signs of a violent fall, including this severe head laceration, Harold had downplayed her injuries during that 911 call, only mentioning a possible concussion.
Withholding crucial medical information from emergency responders is a serious concern.
Yeah.
It can directly impact the victim's chances of survival and raises questions about the intent behind those actions.
So it makes you wonder if he was trying to control the situation, even as his wife lay dying.
Potentially.
And speaking of control, Toni's parents had expressed concerns about Harold's behavior long before the fateful trip. They felt like they could never truly connect with their daughter after she married him. He always seemed to be monitoring their calls, and they noticed a change in Toni.
Yeah.
She seemed withdrawn and less like herself.
This isolation of the victim is a classic tactic used by abusers.
Right.
They often seek to limit the victim's support network, making them more dependent on the abuser and less likely to seek help.
It's like Harold was slowly tightening his grip on her life, cutting her off from her loved ones.
It's a very disturbing pattern.
He even dictated how they raised their daughter Haley, insisting that he be the one to put her to bed each night, calling it special daddy-daughter time.
Controlling seemingly mundane aspects of daily life, like bedtime routines, can be another way for abusers to exert power and dominance within a relationship.
Tony's parents felt powerless as they watched their daughter seemingly slip away. They even noticed inconsistencies in Harold's stories about his finances, suspecting he might not be as successful as he claimed.
Financial control is another common tactic used by abusers.
Really?
Yeah, it can trap the victim in the relationship, making it incredibly difficult for them to leave, even if they're experiencing abuse.
And those suspicions about Harold's finances become even more significant.
Mm-hmm.
When we learn what happened after Tony's death, he seemed strangely emotionless, quickly planning her funeral and insisting on cremation against her family's wishes. He even created a photo slideshow for the memorial service, but every single photo was of him, not Tony.
Wow.
It's like he was trying to erase her from the narrative entirely.
This lack of genuine grief, coupled with the attempt to control the narrative surrounding the death, is a chilling sign. It suggests a potential lack of remorse and a desire to maintain a carefully constructed image.
But then things take another twist. A series of anonymous letters started arriving at various authorities, urging them to look deeper into Tony's death and revealing a shocking detail. Harold had been married before, and his first wife had also died under suspicious circumstances.
These letters were crucial in prompting investigators to revisit the past.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes a new perspective or additional information to expose a pattern of behavior that might have gone unnoticed before.
And what they uncover about Harold's first wife, Lynn, is truly unsettling. But we'll have to save that story for part 2 of our deep dive. For those of you out there in the 45 to 60 age range, maybe thinking you've seen it all, this case is a stark reminder that manipulation and deception can happen to anyone. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this deep dive. We'll be back with more details about Lynn's death, the investigation into Harold's past, and ultimately, the quest for justice.
I can't wait. It's often said that hindsight is 20/20. And in cases like this, it's fascinating to see how the perception of a seemingly perfect life can shift once the cracks begin to show.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes one tiny detail to unravel an entire facade. We left off with those anonymous letters, urging authorities to look into the death of Harold's first wife, Lynn.
Right.
So let's rewind the clock back to 1995 and dive into the details of her story. Lynn was a kind and bubbly social worker,
Okay.
like Tony. She was deeply devoted to her Christian faith. She and Harold met in college,
Okay.
and according to those who knew them, they seemed to have a loving marriage.
Okay.
But tragedy struck one night when Harold claimed they were driving and had to stop to fix a flat tire. He said that while Lynn was under the car retrieving a lug nut, he threw the flat tire in the trunk, accidentally causing the car to fall off the jack and crush Lynn. She later died in the hospital, and at the time it was ruled an accident.
It's important to remember that accident investigations aren't always foolproof. Sometimes crucial details can be missed or misinterpreted, especially when there's no initial reason to suspect foul play.
Right. And in this case, it was those anonymous letters that prompted authorities to reopen Lynn's case. And when they took a closer look, all sorts of red flags started to emerge.
Oh, wow.
So for one thing, Harold had given conflicting accounts of what happened that night. Just like with Tony's death, his story kept changing.
Inconsistencies in a person's story are a major warning sign.
Right?
It suggests they might be trying to conceal the truth or fabricate a version of events that deflects suspicion.
And then there were the physical details of the scene that just didn't add up. Investigators realized that the way Harold described Lynn being under the car was physically impossible, given the position of the vehicle. Plus, the lug nuts would have had to roll uphill to end up where they were found. It simply defied the laws of physics.
This is where forensic science comes into play.
Yeah.
By carefully examining the physical evidence and conducting reconstructions, investigators can often determine whether a scenario is plausible or if it's been staged.
So they even brought in an accident reconstruction specialist who confirmed that Harold's version of events was impossible. The only way Lynn could have been crushed was if someone had intentionally tampered with the jack while she was underneath the car.
This type of expert analysis can be crucial in disproving a suspect's claims and establishing a more accurate understanding of what really transpired.
And as if that wasn't enough, guess what? Harold had taken out a $300,000 life insurance policy on Lynn just a year before her death, a policy that doubled in payout if she died in an accident. And of course, Harold collected that double payout, walking away with $600,000.
This is where the financial motive starts to become a significant factor.
Yeah.
Life insurance, unfortunately, can become a tool for personal gain in cases of murder.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought that someone could exploit the death of a loved one for their own profit.
Right.
And the financial aspect of this case becomes even more disturbing when you consider what they discovered regarding Tony's life insurance. It turned out Harold had taken out not one, but 3 life insurance policies on Tony, totaling a staggering $4.5 million.
The existence of multiple life insurance policies, especially when coupled with suspicious circumstances surrounding the death, is a major red flag for investigators. It points to a potential financial motive and suggests that the death might not have been accidental.
Yeah, it's starting to look less like a series of unfortunate accidents and more like a calculated pattern of deception and potential murder. But could they prove it? Remember how Tony's family had stayed close to Harold after her death, even pretending to believe his stories, all out of fear for their granddaughter's safety?
Right?
Well, the authorities knew they needed to act quickly to ensure Haley's well-being. They secured a search warrant for Harold's home and office. And what they found was shocking. His carefully crafted image of a successful businessman crumbled as they realized his entire business was a fabrication. It didn't exist. He hadn't had a real job since 1992. Yet he was living a life of supposed luxury, controlling all the finances and keeping Tony in the dark about his true financial situation.
This level of deception is often seen in individuals with sociopathic tendencies. They can be incredibly charming and manipulative, creating elaborate lies to present a desired image and exploit others for personal gain.
Yeah, it's remarkable how he managed to maintain this elaborate lie for so long. But eventually, the truth has a way of coming out, especially when you have dedicated investigators on the case. And the truth kept getting more and more disturbing. While digging through Harold's records, they found evidence of frequent communication with a woman named Grace. Remember her?
Right.
She was Lynn's former sister-in-law. Harold had remained close to Lynn's family after her death, even going on vacations and celebrating holidays with them. And he'd even convinced Grace to take out a life insurance policy,
Right.
supposedly to protect her 4 daughters if anything happened to her.
Okay.
But when they checked the policy, it wasn't Grace's daughters listed as the beneficiaries.
Oh, wow.
It was Harold.
Oh, my God.
He'd forged her signature and was set to receive $400,000 if she died.
This pattern of targeting women who are vulnerable, either emotionally or financially, is a hallmark of abusers and manipulators. They prey on those who are less likely to question their motives or suspect their intentions.
It's scary to think how easily he was able to gain their trust and manipulate them for his own benefit. Now, they had 3 women, 2 dead under highly suspicious circumstances,
Right.
and 1 lucky to still be alive, all connected to Harold and these questionable life insurance policies.
This pattern of behavior is a key indicator for investigators. It suggests that the incidents aren't isolated events, but rather part of a larger scheme.
It's truly chilling. And then just when you think it can't get any creepier,
Yeah.
we learn about an incident that happened a year before Tony's death. Remember how Tony's mom mentioned Harold was always controlling and domineering? Well, one night at their vacation cabin, Harold asked Tony to clean up some broken glass under the deck. While she was down there, he dropped a heavy beam from the deck, striking her in the back of the neck. Tony sustained a fractured spine and later told her mom that if she hadn't been bending down at that moment, she believed she would have been killed.
This incident could be interpreted as a clear escalation of violence.
Right.
It's a terrifying example of how abuse can escalate over time,
Right.
potentially turning deadly.
This was starting to feel like a ticking time bomb. They had the suspicious deaths, the inconsistent stories, the financial motive, and now this incident that could be seen as a previous attempt on Tony's life. The authorities knew they had to build a strong case to put Harold away for good, and then came the breakthrough they needed. Remember Harold's phone records showing he'd been near the area where Tony died in the weeks leading up to their anniversary trip? Well, they dug deeper and discovered his cell phone had pinged in that location 8 times.
Oh, wow.
It was like he was meticulously scouting out the perfect spot to stage her fatal fall.
Digital evidence has become increasingly crucial in criminal investigations. Cell phone records, GPS data, internet search history can all provide valuable information that corroborates or contradicts a suspect's alibi.
They finally had enough evidence to arrest Harold. He was taken into custody, but even then his arrogance and audacity shone through. While being booked, he continued to lie about his profession, claiming to work for nonprofits. He was still trying to maintain his facade even when the walls were closing in.
This behavior is consistent with someone who believes they are above the law, someone who thinks they can outsmart everyone. It's a combination of arrogance and a distorted sense of reality.
And the evidence against Harold was about to be laid bare in court. His trial began in 2015, 3 years after Tony's death, and what unfolded was a chilling tale of manipulation, deceit, and cold-blooded murder. But we'll have to save the details of that trial for the final part of our deep dive. For those of you who might be thinking, this could never happen to me, think again. Manipulation can be subtle, and abusers are often master manipulators. Make sure you're subscribed, because in Part 3 we'll delve into the trial, the verdict, and the lasting impact of Harold's actions. Welcome back to our deep dive into the unsettling case of Harold Henthorn. We've uncovered this trail of suspicious deaths, inconsistent stories, and this web of manipulation that spanned decades. Now let's delve into the trial that ultimately brought Harold's reign of deception to an end.
Trials are so fascinating because they really represent a clash of narratives. Each side presents their version of events, and it's up to the jury to determine which story is more credible.
Right. Harold's trial began in September of 2015, 3 years after Tony's death. The prosecution laid out their case, arguing that Harold had meticulously planned and executed the murders of both of his wives, driven by greed and that desire to collect those life insurance payouts. They focused on those inconsistent stories, the financial motive, and the striking similarities between Lynn and Tony's deaths. Both women were seemingly devoted to Harold, trusting and financially well off, making them, in the prosecution's view, prime targets for his scheme.
Presenting a clear and compelling narrative is crucial in any trial, especially when you're dealing with circumstantial evidence.
Right?
The prosecution needed to connect the dots in a way that left no room for reasonable doubt.
And they did just that.
Right.
Remember the map with the X found in Harold's car? That became a central piece of evidence during the trial. The prosecution argued that it showed premeditation, that Harold had not only scouted out the location, but had even marked the spot where Tony would meet her demise.
This type of physical evidence can be so powerful. It provides a tangible link between the suspect and the crime scene, making it much more difficult for the defense to dismiss as mere coincidence.
Right, and they also presented evidence of Harold's odd behavior after Tony's death. His emotionless demeanor, his insistence on cremation against her family's wishes, and that bizarre photo slideshow at the memorial service that focused solely on him.
These actions, while not direct evidence of murder, can really paint a picture for the jury. They can suggest a possible lack of genuine grief and a desire to control the narrative surrounding the death.
Right, it's like he was trying to erase Tony from the story entirely. And then there was the digital evidence. Harold initially refused to hand over his cell phone, claiming he had gotten rid of it, but the prosecution subpoenaed his phone records, which showed those incriminating text messages sent on the night of Tony's death and his numerous trips to the area where she died.
Digital forensics plays an increasingly important role in modern investigations. Cell phone records, GPS data, internet search history. They can all provide these valuable insights into a suspect's actions and intentions.
Right, the prosecution even brought in the 911 dispatcher who had spoken to Harold after Tony's fall, and she testified that he didn't sound out of breath or distressed, even though he claimed to be performing CPR.
Jurors pay attention to those kinds of details.
Yeah.
They can often be more persuasive than complex technical evidence because they appeal to common sense and human experience.
Right, yeah. Harold's defense team tried to counter all of this by arguing that he was just a devoted husband who had been struck by two unimaginable tragedies. They pointed to the fact that there were no eyewitnesses to either death, and that the prosecution's case was built entirely on speculation and circumstantial evidence.
That's a common defense strategy in cases lacking direct evidence, attempting to create reasonable doubt by suggesting alternative explanations and highlighting any gaps in the prosecution's theory.
But in the end, the jury wasn't swayed. After deliberating for about 10 hours, they returned with a guilty verdict. Harold Henthorn was found guilty of the murder of his second wife, Tony. Some jurors later commented that Harold came across as arrogant and unlikable, which may have influenced their perception of him and the weight they gave to the evidence presented.
Demeanor plays a surprisingly significant role in trial.
Oh, really?
Yeah. How a defendant presents themselves, their body language, their tone of voice. It can all impact how the jury perceives them and their credibility.
It's fascinating how those subtle cues can influence such important decisions. The verdict brought a mix of relief and grief to Tony's family. They finally had justice for their daughter, but the pain of her loss, of course, remained. They also expressed a strong belief that Harold had killed his first wife, Lynn, even though that case remained officially unresolved.
It's not uncommon for families to feel a sense of closure or validation when a perpetrator is convicted, even if it doesn't bring back their loved one. It can also bring a sense of peace knowing that the person responsible is no longer a threat to others.
And in this case, preventing Harold from harming anyone else was a top priority. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He maintains his innocence and has filed multiple appeals, but so far, they've all been denied. While Lynn's death was never officially ruled a homicide, the circumstances surrounding it played a significant role in Harold's conviction for Tony's murder. The similarities between the two cases were simply too striking to ignore.
This case highlights the importance of revisiting past cases when new evidence or patterns of behavior emerge.
Right?
Sometimes what might have seemed like an accident in isolation takes on a whole new meaning when viewed in the context of subsequent events.
It's like that saying, once is an accident, twice is a pattern. And while Harold sits behind bars, Tony's daughter Haley is being raised by one of Tony's brothers and his wife. They're working to give her a loving and stable home far removed from the shadow of her father's horrific crimes.
The impact of crimes like this extends far beyond the immediate victims. Children, families, entire communities are affected. It's a reminder that justice is not just about punishment, but also about healing and providing support for those who have been harmed.
Absolutely. And this case also underscores the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships and trusting your gut instincts. If something feels off, if someone's behavior raises concerns, it's crucial to seek help and support. Don't dismiss those feelings or try to rationalize them away. Trust your instincts. And remember, you are not alone. There are resources available to help. And remember, if you found this deep dive thought-provoking, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll be back with more fascinating stories, insightful analysis, and hopefully some valuable lessons we can all apply to our lives. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.